there are all sorts of crazed conspiracy theories coming out of Democrats, and well, they know if they say it. Over the weekend, you had a Democrat activist who tweeted that Trump hadn't gone to church on Easter and said the Obamas always did. But as it turns out, Trump was on his way to church at the time. And yet then the guy wouldn't back down. And his tweet got 30,000 retweets. So you've got a lot of misinformed people out there who actually believe Trump didn't go to church. Liberals don't care that it's a lie. They don't. They in their minds, the ends justify the means, and the ends are that total control over everybody else's lives. And so if you have to lie to get there, so be it. When you don't believe that there's any penalty, if you're godless in the first place, then you don't see that there's going to be a day of reckoning. 834, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 47. One ridiculous comment from one of these liberal activists yesterday when Jason Chaffetz announced he was going to be leaving the House of Representatives. Now, he's a member of the House from Utah. When he announced that he was leaving, I believe there was one liberal who said that it was because he knew that his ties to Russia were going to be coming out. Yeah, because the Russians have infiltrated Utah, that's for sure. 835, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. All of those old communist Politburo members, yeah, when they lost their jobs, they took over the LDS Church, but they've been doing it very quietly, you see. I wanted to mention our friends at Waddell & Reed this morning here in Twin Falls. They have been investing money since 1937, one of the oldest firms in the country to offer mutual funds. And in fact, Waddell & Reed owns and manages 2 mutual fund families, investing by a conservative nature. If you'd like to know if they know what they're doing, again, 8 decades in business, I think that answers the question. If you don't know what you're doing, you're not in business for very long. 8 decades is pretty good evidence these people are at the top of the game. They know what they're doing, and they'll take a planning approach, working with you on your individual needs and goals. Waddell & Reed helps build proper expectations and will help you manage money. And at Waddell & Reed, they take planning personally. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Chaffetz explaining yesterday why he is actually stepping down. And it seems it has more to do, well, you're traveling a long, long distance. And if you've got family, well, you don't get to see them a lot.
I did talk to Paul Ryan yesterday, and he said, wait, don't do that. And I said, let's have a discussion first. And I said, well, I kind of already made this this decision. That's between me and my wife, not me and the speaker. So I had a good conversation with him. I did with Kevin McCarthy, and I did with Reince Priebus over there at the White House, and just said, look, this is what's best for our Chaffetz family.
I was thinking about that today. Members of the House who are relatively young and have to do a lot of traveling, very, very difficult. I personally know Andy Harris, who's a congressman, and he's the only Republican in the entire Maryland delegation. And Andy Harris, he has a drive from Annapolis to Washington for work every day, a short drive, and then back home. And his wife died a couple of years ago, and he has still some young children around the house, and he's got to take care of them. But again, he leaves the house in the morning, goes to work, and comes home. Where if you're Jason Chaffetz, you're jumping on an airplane and you're flying across the continent. There are some challenges in all of that. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next, and you're on the air on Top Story. Well, we'll hope that you can get back in touch with us sometime soon. Chaffetz explaining this was not a rash decision.
We've been talking about this for a few months, and it was really my birthday where we really sort of made the final decision, and then took a couple weeks to make sure it was the right decision. It's good to go out on top. I've won 5 elections here in Utah. I've won by the widest margin of anybody running.
The media is not trying to say that the liberal Democrat who wants the seat has a real chance to win it, except it's one of the most conservative districts in the entire country. But media has been trying to do this in Kansas and Georgia and various places and unsuccessfully trying to do it. In the meantime, this comes from the Salt Lake Tribune. Evan McMullen ran a long shot and ultimately failed campaign last year to deny Donald Trump enough editorial or electoral college votes to keep him from the presidency. But now the Utah native faces a hefty bill that will be challenging to pay off and could hamper efforts to enter the political arena again. He's already expressed an interest in Chaffetz's seat. McMullen, who jumped into the race a few months before Election Day, still owes some $670,000 to vendors who helped his campaign, including more than $500,000 to a law firm. Explains why I actually happened to see him eating one day at the Walmart subway, um, because apparently he can't afford anything else. But he is thinking he'd like that seat. What's disappointing about this, look, I didn't think that McMullen stood a snowball's chance in Hades when he decided to challenge Trump. But the conservatives who put him up to it, Bill Kristol and Jonah Goldberg and some of the others, they haven't lifted a finger to help him pay off his campaign debt. And McMullen would be a perfect replacement for Chaffetz. He doesn't have any children, first of all, so he doesn't have to worry about being home with them. He can concentrate on his work and on the district. But once more, all of the people who drafted him to challenge as a conservative independent candidate for president are now ignoring the fact that he ran up these huge campaign bills. You'll find out what their true mettle is in a few weeks if they don't bail him out. We've got more on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Fox News is reporting that former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown is going to be named ambassador to New Zealand. That would be a dream job. I will only tell you this about these people who serve as ambassadors. My friend Jerry Holland, I worked with Jerry at a radio station back in the 1990s. Jerry's younger brother was going out with the actress Angela Bassett, lucky guy. But Jerry's dad had been the ambassador to Sweden under President Nixon. And he did it for 3 years and then said, I need someone to pitch relief. And he came home and I said to Jerry, why did he make the decision to do that? And Jerry said, well, they don't tell you that you have to pay to do all of the entertaining. All of the diplomatic entertaining that's done isn't done out of the State Department budget. It's done out of the pocket of the ambassador. So Scott Brown hopefully has a pretty good war chest put together so he can feed all of the New Zealand, all of the New Zealand politicians will be coming by for dinner. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 8:43. Jerry's dad didn't speak a lick of Swedish, I should also point out, which the Swedes are pretty good with their English, but this was 40-some years ago. I don't know that Sweden's English as a second language program was really all that far up to speed. So you've got somebody in the middle of dinner who's trying to translate everything, too. Quick note, speaking of listening to people as they're speaking, whether they be speaking in any language, if you're having a difficult time with your hearing, you need to get in touch with Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. And I've been telling you, there are many choices available for health care. Why would you choose Mount Harrison Audiology? You would choose them because of independence. Mount Harrison Audiology is the only independent, locally owned hearing health care practice in southern Idaho. That means more choices for treatment than just one brand and lower cost. Trust your hearing to a certified audiologist. Call Mount Harrison Audiology for your appointment today. The number, 208-312-0957. That's 312-0957. If you'd like to reach our show today, telephone number is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. I was mentioning Jason Chaffetz and his departure from the U.S. House of Representatives. It's not known if it's going to be immediate or if he's going to finish serving out his term. Chaffetz is not denying that he may run for governor of Utah in 2020. And a lot of people out there are saying, well, wouldn't it be easier to be a sitting member of the House of Representatives and then run for governor? Well, not really, because you have to at least make a show of being in Washington, and you can't very well be campaigning on the streets of Utah while you're doing that. So it may well be, and plus you're closer to home. You can be with your family. You move into the governor's mansion, you're with your family, and they're all together on a daily basis. Liberals don't understand this, I suppose, because they think that, I've heard them say in the past, and you see it in some of their writings as well, well, the definition of family has changed. You know, if you have 3 daddies, and occasionally you have 5 mommies, and it takes a village, that's what they like to tell you. So we've broken down the family unit. When somebody like Jason Chaffetz comes along and says, well, I think I need to be with the kids and with my wife more often, liberals don't understand that. To them, the children, I guess, are just little automatons, and as long as you dump them off at daycare and have government funded, everybody else pay for it, you should be just fine. We're at 846, we're at 49. Quick note on the weather. I looked through the forecast. It'll be really nice. No, it won't be really nice. It'll be nicer this weekend, Saturday anyway. And then it gets cloudy again on Sunday. Temperatures both days in the 60s. Those are the best days we have in the long range forecast for a long time. If you're looking at now the long range, you really can't say 3 days out what it's going to be. But they try to make projections now based on jet stream and other factors that they see storms over the Pacific. It is not going to be a pretty sight next week. I'll just put it that way. Lots of really drab, dreary days and a lot of rain. And here we are in the middle of a desert, and we're wondering, have we experienced too much? Just a quick note, the weather is a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch, located in Mountain Home, and I'd like to point out, my own slogan for that is, it's the candy store for adults, especially men if you like pickup trucks. Talking a little bit about members of the House of Representatives, there was a television story that I saw about Raul Labrador getting booed and jeered while he was at a town hall meeting. It didn't look like it bothered him at all. I saw him on stage, and it looked as if he was just rolling with the punches. This is the AP story. U.S. Representative Raul Labrador faced cheers from a combative crowd when he said that he does not believe there is any evidence of criminality inside President Donald Trump's tax returns. The question for liberals is, where's your evidence? Well, we don't necessarily need any evidence. He's a Republican and he says bad things. You know, Tom Perez, who now runs the Democrat National Committee, dropped the excrement word, saying that Republicans don't give an excrement about you. He didn't say excrement. He used some other popular form, which was popularized, in fact, by Democrat Harry Truman back in the late 1940s. Somebody said to Bess Truman one time, they said to her, can't you get your husband to stop saying manure? And they were using manure as a euphemism. And she looked back at them and said, I've been trying to get him to say it for years. In other words, I'm trying to get him to say manure because it's cleaner than what he's been saying. So you get Tom Perez, and he goes out and he drops that S word in front of a crowd, and liberals go hog wild about it. In fact, they're now marketing T-shirts at the DNC that use that potty mouth word. If Donald Trump said something like that, people would say, oh, how crude, oh, Mr. Trump is just a Visigoth, and oh, you'd never elect him to high office. But if a Democrat says it, it's like, well, he's only saying it because that's how people really feel. And of course, they have a right to feel that way because they're not getting their free lunch any longer, so they should be allowed to say whatever they like. You think there's a double standard going on there? Trump is crude, and he's a man who he doesn't have a governor on his mouth, and he just says whatever comes into his head. And yet Tom Perez comes out and says it when he's got a mouthful. And that's okay. That's okay. Why? Because he's got a D after his name. That's why. 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. The writer goes on to say Labrador held his first town hall of the year Wednesday night. The room, which seats 1,200, was nearly full of progressive activists. Now, why do they call them progressives? I wrote that they used to have an ombudsman at the Washington Post, and he kept referring to progressives instead of liberals. They changed the name. Liberals changed their own name because they drove the name liberal into a ditch, and they realized that they'd ruined their brand. So they said, we got to come up with a better, we'll call ourselves progressives. But progressive implies that's not objective. It's a subjective term. It means you believe that you are making progress and that this is progress for civilization or our culture. But not everybody believes that all of these high spending programs that you back are actually making any progress. So I wrote the ombudsman at the Washington Post and said, why do you keep calling them progressives? And his response was, that's what they want to be called. So I wrote him back and said, well, as a conservative, why don't you call me an all-enlightened being? That did not go over well with him. He wrote me back and said, don't be silly. Well, yeah, but I think what they're doing is regressive. There's not what you'd call a consensus among American voters that any of their policies are progressive or making progress. We should also point out, when I was involved heavily in the Tea Party movement, 7-8 years ago, we kept hearing, oh, this is just AstroTurf. I'd go to the local firehouse in my small town, 1,200 people, I'd go to the local firehouse, and you'd have Marine Corps veterans and farmers and hardware store owners and people like that who were showing up, and we were being told that we were somehow being funded by the Koch brothers. Well, we never saw any of their money. But on the other hand, the DNC sends out its talking points every day and says, go bother Raul Labrador. So they all go out and bother him. And then the media says, this is how the public feels about Raul Labrador. Yeah, well, guess what? If he runs again for office for Congress in 2018, he'll still rack up 88% of the vote in the district. Yeah, but doesn't matter. These are probably the only 1,200 people who live in that district who are progressive or liberal. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Well, I wish Raul had a brother and he was over here and we could get rid of Deadweight Simpson.
I think he does. His name is Fidel. No, that's a different family.
Okay, I know you may have spoke on this, but I wasn't able to listen, and I'm going to ask you a question. The same forces that took out Ailes are taking out O'Reilly. They're going to take out Hannity. They're destroying Fox News. Is there a possibility? There's proof that O'Reilly's being set up, and Beck talked about it yesterday. I hope I'm not repeating anything you've already done. But
just the first half hour, but go ahead.
Well, I'm terribly sorry. I am. I'm serious.
No. Go ahead. We only had one call on it, so go ahead.
Well, the thing of it is, this is, we've got to do something. Is there a chance that somehow somebody could, I don't know, Ailes and O'Reilly and went out to a different network? I'm going to hang up. Thanks.
But I'll add to that too. I hope he's going to listen on the air. And I mentioned, if you missed it in the first half hour, look, I realize that people can't always have the radio stuck in their ear walking around during the course of the day. Sometimes you have to get out and run into the store, or between the time you walk from the parking lot into an office, or you've got a meeting. There are different things that come up like that. But I'll mention it again if you're just joining us. For about 18 months now, it has been rumored, long before even Ailes was let go by Fox, it had been rumored that Ailes and O'Reilly, and maybe they would even take Hannity with them, were planning on starting their own network. And they all have the money to do it, for crying out loud. None of them are going to starve. They're all wealthy beyond belief. O'Reilly has written several best-selling books. He had a syndicated radio show for a while, too. Hannity has been on syndicated radio for 21 years. Ailes, his package when he left was $40 million, I think, the parachute he was given, plus whatever stock options he had over the years for building that product into the behemoth that it currently is. I mean, it is a massive profit center for Rupert Murdoch's company, which is News Corp, is much bigger. It owns newspapers and some other outlets, Sky News in Europe. But I had been hearing 18 months ago that this group was planning on starting its own network. And you sometimes wonder if Fox is just using this as an excuse, realizing these guys are going to go anyway. So let's get the jump and get some new talent in here and start trying to promote that. Because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these people had in their contracts that if Ailes was let go, they had the option of going with Roger somewhere else. And Roger, at the moment, he has a non-compete that says he can't work for a few more months for another network or a startup. But there is that new conservative network, and I think some people have it on their packages. I think you have to pay extra for it. And you can get it. I have a computer package now that I'm using. But if you pay extra, you can get this. They've got Michelle Malkin. For a brief period, Mark Stein worked there too as well. If you saw Ailes suddenly pop up there, and he could bring over O'Reilly, and he could bring over Hannity, and there had been some talk too that when she left Fox and signed with MSDNC, Greta Van Susteren, there was some talk as well that she had that out also in her contract, even with her new employer. So they could put something together. The difficult thing is that Fox, and I pointed this out earlier, they put Carlson into Megyn Kelly's time slot. Everyone said, oh, Megan's gone. It's all over for Fox now. She's their future star. Does anybody even give her a thought any longer? And the ratings were higher for Tucker Carlson and have been higher for Tucker Carlson. In fact, when Tucker moved in and for a time he was hosting one of the earlier shows, the ratings were higher. Remember, the idea was they'd bring Brit Hume back for a short stretch, and I know a lot of people out there don't like Brit Hume because he's an old-fashioned newsman. Let me tell you, back in the 1980s, when television news was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and CNN was an afterthought, and it wasn't conservative. You only had a handful of conservatives who were working in TV news. One of those happened to be Britt Hume. He was the trailblazer, and people used to mock him for his hangdog face or his ties, and I used to sit back and think, this is the guy who really made all of this possible, because he stood up to all of that baloney back in the 1980s and pulled the curtain back and did some serious reporting without mocking Ronald Reagan at every corner. You may remember every night you turned on the news for 8 years, from 1981 until January 1989, every night you heard stories about homeless Americans. And then Ronald Reagan left, and you haven't heard much about that since, even though under Obama, the number of homeless Americans skyrocketed. Well, Britt Hume was the one guy who was objective about that during the 1980s. Just telling you, Fox News will survive with really no matter who they put on the air. Remember, they brought over the woman from The View, Hasselbeck, Elizabeth Hasselbeck. And the ratings went up in the morning show at Fox and Friends. But then Elizabeth decided she wanted to spend more time with her family, and she left after, less than 2 years? So they brought in somebody else. They put on a new host, a new co-host, and nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. And I share that with you because there's this belief that, O'Reilly's gone, it's all over for Fox. And as I said in the last half hour, I've been in the broadcast industry now for 31 years myself. And I remember getting let go from a job in Syracuse, New York, and all of the folks, the conservatives, were up in arms about it. 6 months later, they were happy with my replacement. I got replaced for a while by a syndicated show, and then they eventually realized, that didn't work, so they had to go with a live body again. And the same thing happened when I left Delaware. One of my best friends is now in my old time slot, and people are quite happy with him, even though for about 6 months they were unhappy with my departure. Life goes on. We've got a short break. News is next. One more hour of Top Story ahead with Bill Colley. It's 49. And you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. By the way, Democrats are now attacking John Ossoff, the guy who did not win the special election in Georgia the other day. They'll start eating their young any time now. Well, they already abort them, so I guess eating them will be the next step. Details on that are ahead.